Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor, but also a spiritual seeker. And today we're going to talk about what a lot of people have been talking about, which is Louisiana's decision to force schools to post the 10 Commandments. So we'll talk about that all in this video. Check it out. So the first thing I want to say right away is that as a pastor, I'm absolutely against this decision. As a pastor and a Christian, I am against forcing religion on anybody. It just doesn't work. I mean, I know what the idea is and what the plan is. For some of these people who believe that everybody should be Christian, that Christianity is the right religion, that everybody would be saved and go to heaven and the world would be a better place if everyone was Christian, I disagree with that a lot. And I'm not going to go into why. But with that thought often comes the ends justify the means. That if we can force people, whatever we can do to get them to church, to get them to read the Bible, to get them to believe in certain things, then great. The problem with that is anything that is controlling is ultimately going to backfire because it's not loving. It's like if you have a kid, you're trying to really get interested in vegetables because you know that vegetables are healthy. And while I do encourage my kids to eat their vegetables when we cook them, absolutely forcing them to eat certain foods over and over and over again to the point where they're probably going to grow up and never eat that vegetable again. They might even be angry with you and have some deep resentment if you were actually force feeding them certain foods. And that's exactly what's happened in the United States and in other places, is where religion has been very controlling and very fear, shame, and guilt-based and indoctrinating and forcing people to act and believe in certain ways. Shockingly, people are leaving the church in droves. So the decision to do something this controlling is just baffling, and it shows that the people making the decision are incompetent, clueless, and also really bad Christians. But let's just take a look at these 10 commandments that everybody gets so excited about. Conservatives, I should say, get excited about and want to have posted everywhere. Let's take a little bit of a closer look and see what would happen if they actually followed the 10 commandments. The first thing I do want to say is it's bizarre that some Christians get so excited about the 10 commandments because it is in the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures. It is not something that Jesus even quotes. When Jesus does quote the Hebrew scriptures, he quotes a lot from Deuteronomy, and he quotes verses that are about loving your neighbor, and about loving God. In addition, Jesus, when asked to sum all the laws and the prophets, sums everything up into love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. That threefold relationship is really the basis of any and all religions, and that's universal. And yet somehow what some people like are much more of the punitive and controlling belief systems. But again, as I said, let's take a closer look at these 10 commandments that they want so much for everybody to adhere to. So here we go. While in the actual Bible, it never says commandment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we actually divvied out which commandment is which, and there's a little bit of difference depending on Catholicism and Protestantism. Also in the Hebrew scriptures, they're not called the 10 commandments, they're called the 10 words. But for some reason, conservatives love the word commandments because it's commanding and this is what you have to do. Again, here we go. So the first commandment is that you honor the Lord your God, that you worship the Lord your God and only God. All right, take that seriously. If you are to have no other gods before the living God, then that means that patriotism, nationalism, sports, guns, that essentially nothing in your life is more important than the relationship that you have with the living God. It's actually one of the hardest ones to obey because we have so many things that get in the way. We have so many other things that we put as priority, and they can feel really good. But at the end of the day, anything that we try to put up in the place of God is an idol. And that includes the Bible. That includes doctrines. That includes theologies. That includes all sorts of things that we're holding on to very tightly and we refuse to let go of. That includes patriarchy. We have turned so many things into a God by equating them with God and saying that God cannot be separated from the Bible, from our theology, from our doctrines, from patriarchy, rule of men over women and certain races over other races. Like all this colonialism, all this violence that has been done in the name of God is idolatry at the end of the day. So we can't even get past the first commandment. But let's go on to the second one. The second one is to not use the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now, what that doesn't mean, and what everybody thinks it means, is you shouldn't swear. You shouldn't say, God damn and Jesus Christ. That's not what it means. What it means is you should not use the name of God in any way that's ego-based to control or to manipulate other people. Again, massive failure around the world in this particular commandment, because you have religions and politicians from the beginning of patriarchy rule around the world who have used the name of God to force, control, manipulate, and lie to people. And that is breaking this commandment. The third commandment is about Sabbath. It's about the human right to rest. And not even the human right, it includes animals. It says that all of creation needs a rest. All of creation needs a rest. And so if you're in touch with your faith and you're in touch with the living God, not only do you take a rest, but you allow for absolutely everybody to have a rest. Now, this to me gets into fair labor laws. This gets into how you're treating the people who work for you. This gets into sick pay and maternity and paternity leave and all sorts of other issues about treating people fairly in a loving, kind way where they have time to be human. They have time to recuperate from the stress of the day. And this involves the way we treat animals. This involves the way we treat Earth, that everything has time to grow and regenerate and recuperate. And that is absolutely not what's happening right now in the world, especially under capitalism, which is all about money, which, by the way, is a big idol in our country. Then we move on to honoring our father and mother, which isn't about little kids sitting down and obeying their parents, even if they're being beaten or yelled at or sexually abused. Nope, not at all. This is about honoring the elderly in our lives. This is against ableism. This comes from a time in which people might have been moving a lot, in which physical ability was important. And so it was tempting to take the people who were sick, the people who were weak, and the people who were old and leave them behind and discard them. But this commandment says you can't do this. It says that the weak people, the people who need help, the people who mentally or physically are incapacitated in some way need to be treated with honor and dignity until the day that they die. And that is absolutely not happening. And imagine if our country took that seriously. Imagine what elder care would look like. Imagine what it would look like for people who had mental or physical disabilities to have access, easy access to all of the resources that they needed. But as we know, that absolutely does not happen. All right, moving on. You shall not murder, or you shall not kill. And this is a really, really hard one, because what does it mean? Some people get really excited about abortion and about killing babies, but honestly, this is a way, way bigger option. This means you shouldn't intentionally try to kill somebody or to take life away from them in any way. And I think about the way we do this with animals and the way that we treat animals in our world. I think about the way that people are enslaved and have been enslaved around the world and treated horribly. I think about the way that women are very vulnerable around the world to being murdered and killed. I think about all of the ways in which the fullness of life that people can have is robbed of them. So you don't need to have a physical knife and stab someone in order to break this commandment. Just by creating a society in which some people are valued less than others and their death is not even investigated. I think about the cries around George Floyd and all sorts of police brutality that is happening in our country as well in other places of the world where some lives seem to value more than others. We get upset about when some people are killed or die, and we don't get upset about when other people killed or die. So conservative Christians, you should be the first marching and holding up a Black Lives Matter sign. 6, you shall not commit adultery. Now, this one has a lot of baggage to it because traditionally in Hebrew law, the only people who really kind of could commit adultery were women, because men could kind of sleep with whoever they want to and have multiple wives, and it was the women who were stoned for committing adultery. So that kind of sucks. But ultimately, when we look deeper into this, it really is about valuing and honoring one another and the sexual relationship. And so I like to talk about this as really broadening this out, is that this is about honoring not just marriage, but honoring sexual relationships, that both partners are being honored and that nobody is doing something that's going to harm the other person emotionally or sexually, which brings us into conversations about consent, that sexual relationships should be consensual, that no one should force themselves upon anybody else, that there should be honesty and transparency in the relationship, that is more important than anything else. All right, so then we have the commandment that you shall not steal. This is a really tricky one because basically what we're talking about here, it's respecting other people's rights to property and to a life in which they can sustain themselves and their family. And so it's often thought about, like in the middle of the night, hopping over someone's fence and breaking into their property and taking something. Well, that's sort of like the most basic form of stealing, going into someone else's property and taking apples off of their tree or stealing a chicken. But in reality, this goes much deeper because there has been a lot of theft that has happened legally. And even in Jesus' time, he talked about this a lot, about the ways in which there were powerful people who were landowners that basically, because of Roman taxes, were benefiting off of these taxes as the lower class was having to sell off land that had been in their family for generations. That is stealing. And even though it is legal, it is immoral and unethical. And there has been a lot that has happened in the United States history that we like to whitewash and not talk about very much in terms of robbing people of their property and of their rights and their ability to flourish in this land. And we have definitely laws that have benefited some and have really not benefited other people. So if we're going to talk about not stealing, then we need to really look at the laws that we have created and be honest and make sure that all people have the right to a place to live and to food, let alone to fair wages. Stealing wages, wage theft, come on, this is such a huge, huge issue. And then there's the commandment to not lie. This is tricky because being honest about your intentions, being honest about what you think and believe, living in an authentic way, living with integrity, having your words match your deeds, your thoughts match your words, all of those pieces is really hard for us as humans, and it's a huge challenge. And we know that there are a lot of people, especially in the political world, let alone in other leadership positions, who do not speak honestly. They spin and they twist and they manipulate and they lie and they withhold the truth from a lot of consumers and from a lot of people in the public because they have an agenda. And so to say do not lie would mean to speak honestly and plainly and not having any agenda other than for the building up of the whole. The last commandments are really about coveting. And coveting is not just, looking and going, oh, what a nice car, that Brenda has. Gosh, that's really nice. I kind of wish I had something like that. It's not jealousy or envy necessarily, but it's rather something deeper. It's not being satisfied with your own life and wanting to possess something else. And I will say this gets kind of gross because women are included as property. And so these really refer to men in a lot of ways. These are commandments aimed at men as property holders and as heads of the household. And so I often joke that women can't apparently break commandments 9 and 10, so we're off the hook for that. But obviously that's silly. As patriarchal and gross and misogynistic as these last two commandments are, the point is that wanting what someone else has to the point where you're going to scheme and try to figure out a way to get it is deeply problematic and not at all the way people are to be. So there you go. When you look at the 10 Commandments, basically you are seeing the commandment to love God and your neighbor spelled out in ways that made sense to people over 3,000 years ago, that were very, very specific. And yeah, they still have some really interesting things for us to talk about, but for the conservative Christians who want to have these posted everywhere, I just have to say, could you start to follow them first?